Nina was a pirate who had risen up the ranks. Often, she might be easily irritated, but she was very experienced at handling matters. She was a rather reliable person. After some thought, she gave a description in a serious manner. The well's mouth is at a rather deep depth along the seabed. I need enough time to adjust myself before I can acclimatize to the temperature and pressure of the area. That's why I took so much time to get there. It isn't easily discovered, but the remnant iron buildings are indeed rather obvious. I found them once I got acclimatized. They've already completely collapsed or rotted. There's no way to imagine what they originally looked like. However, I could tell that they definitely spanned across a great distance in the past. It's just shrunken by a great deal now. When Nina said this, she chuckled and scanned all the men around her. A real female pirate is indeed different. Klein sighed from the bottom of his heart. From his point of view, be it Admiral of Stars Catlia, Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina, or Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, none of them could be considered a pure female pirate. All of them hailed from major factions or secret organizations. When they were low secret beyond theirs, they were either not at sea, or they were following important figures, so what they did were relatively safe matters. Otherwise, they were independent adventurers who had never been tainted by the characters and atmosphere of low or mid-level pirates. After Nina finished laughing, Catlia pointed her finger to the rusted item that could hardly be described as a metal beam. This is a portion of the iron building. Yes, Captain, as you know, I don't know much about history or mysticism. I could only bring some back for your inspection. You're an expert on this. Nina smiled as she handed the metal beam over. Then, she pointed at the black piece of hardened mud which was filled with holes on its surface. Not far from the iron ruins, I found a well. It's not very big. If it's to be described with the word huge, then I've definitely seen plenty of huge cannons. Those drunken adventurers are better at bragging than us pirates. This is the mud from the inner layer of the well. I can't imagine how such patterns could be formed. Nina's finger repeatedly struck the honeycomb dots on the black mud. Klein originally believed that they were marks left behind by dent shots with very tiny projectiles, but after a careful inspection, he suspected that they were remnant patterns after something had rotted. Each spot was very shallow as its edges spread outwards in an irregular pattern. Nina handed the black mud to Catlia as she continued describing. The well's mouth is really small. Even a child from this wouldn't be able to enter. It's very deep. I even felt that it was bottomless. In that environment, the interior was completely dark as though something was slowly summoning me. Yes, slowly. I found a few rocks nearby and threw them in, but there wasn't any response. In short, it's filled with water. Catlia held up the metallic beam and black mud. Through the thick glasses, she observed them seriously. Since the mouth is very small and humans can't enter them, there's no need for us to begin the exploration immediately. It will be very dangerous. Let's wait until I figure out the secrets hidden within these items and whether the ancient well is worth us taking the risk before we return to make an attempt. Aye aye, Captain. The wet Nina was trembling as a result of the cold winds. The way she wavered made all the surrounding pirates stare straight at her. Catlia nudged her glasses and said to Nina, "You can drink a bottle of Sonia blood wine. There's no limit for the rest." "Long live the captain," Nina cried out in joy. "An underwater well that humans can't enter." Klein, who had no desire to explore it, summarized Nina's description. Suddenly, he had a strange idea. Humans are unable to enter the well, but that doesn't mean that non-humans can't do it. Many deep-sea fishes aren't necessarily that huge. There's a significant chance that they can pass through the well. As the sea god, he had the means to make marine creatures do his bidding while wielding the scepter. There's no rush. Let's see if Man Hermit is able to figure out anything from these two objects. I'll consider whether I'll explore it on the return trip. Otherwise, I might attract some exaggerated danger. There's still not enough information regarding this. There's no way to do any divination. As his thoughts wandered, Klein's expression remained deadpan. At that moment, Catlia shot him a glance out of curiosity. Then, she retracted her gaze without leaving any traces. Why did she suddenly look at me? She was seeing what I was doing. It's impossible for her to know that I possess the sea god scepter and can make marine creatures do my bidding. That's not right. She knows, but she only knows that Mr. Fool wields Corvetu's godhood scepter, not the world, unless she has figured out that the world is the fool, but that's even more impossible. Even Mr. Hanged Man is still stuck at the concept that the world is a blessed. She hasn't even realized this point. Viewing this from a different point of view, I'll consider it from Admiral of Stars' angle. She's someone being pursued by knowledge, and she's a follower of Queen Mystic. She's loyal to the Moses ascetic order, and she has roamed the sea for years. She has plenty of knowledge and experience, so it wouldn't be odd that she knows that the sea god domain possesses the beyond the power to control marine creatures. Therefore, after realizing that humans are unable to pass through the ancient well, she naturally made the connection with the scepter in Mr. Fool's hand. Does she plan on requesting for help in the future? She looked at me to figure out if the world has also grasped the corresponding information or have similar ideas. Many ideas went through Klein's mind. With the powers of Clown, he forcefully maintained his indifferent expression. He didn't react abnormally in any way. As Nina was about to draw the Sonia blood wine, Klein pressed down his hat and returned to the cabin. Just as he was about to approach the door, a figure surfaced in his mind suddenly. In a room in the cabin's upper level, the windows were tightly shut and the curtains were drawn. There were a pair of blurry eyes hidden behind them, silently watching the crowd on the deck, as well as Gem and Sparrow. Who is it? Klein didn't stop. His body didn't show any hesitation as he entered the cabin normally as though nothing had happened. At 3 in the afternoon, the bright but not scorching sunlight shone into the garden adjacent to Stone University. Michel Duth was already a senior associate professor by 40. He was wearing a long tail coat and a beautiful bow tie as he waited by the door. Yesterday evening, he received a letter. The sender was from the attendant of the richest aristocratic family in East Chester County, the Hall family. The person who wrote the letter was the daughter of a member of Parliament from the House of Lords who wielded immense influence. She was Miss Audrey Hall, who was deemed to be the most stunning gem in Bagland. This noble lady had mentioned in the letter that she had learned from a gathering that Mr. Michel Duth was an outstanding collector and an aficionado of this domain. She had a great desire in paying a visit. Michel Duth didn't have any reason to refuse. Soon, a classic carriage with a family emblem arrived at the door. 2 servants, who had been instructed to open the outer gates made of iron railings, led the carriage around the garden and arrived in front of the house. A housekeeper was the first to alight, followed by guards and maidservants. Following that, a hand wearing a long white gauzed glove was extended outside. With the help of the maidservants, Audrey elegantly stepped onto the carpet which Michel had paved. Michel was first taken aback before his eyes lit up. He felt as though the flowers in the garden had instantly faded. He took 2 steps forward and took off his hat to bow. "Welcome, my honourable lady. Your visit is an honour for me and my family." Audrey took off the veiled hat and passed it to her maidservant before exchanging a few pleasantries. Then, she followed Michel Duth into the living room and entered the collector's room on the first floor. Here, Michel finally found his confidence as the master of the house. He began pointing at his collection and providing an introduction from the left. This is a helmet that appeared in the White Rose War. After lots of research, it can be determined that the owner is a member of the Sorin family. Back then, they were still considered royalty. The golden helmet had an intricate design. There were avian and flying wings that adorned it, and the visor was formed from pieces of golden scales. My ancestor obtained his first aristocratic title in that war, Audrey replied with piqued interest. She had already adjusted her mental state ahead of time. She was to appear as though she was really here to tour the collections. The failure of the 20-year war had caused the kingdom to suffer years of humiliation, but it also carved out several heroes. Michel resorted to flattery. The White Rose War happened after the 20-year war and before the Battle of the Violated Oath. There, Lowen defeated Intis and became strong again. Michel continued introducing his collection as Audrey solemnly listened, raising questions from time to time as she conversed with him. Finally, Michel's finger pointed towards a notebook with a black cover. This belonged to a knight stationed on Sonia Island in the 20-year war. This knight's name has already vanished in the long rivers of history. This notebook is the only proof of his existence. He once stood fast until the very last moment on Sonia Island. This notebook is not only a first-hand account for the research of that portion of history, but it also hides certain problems. The knight's grammar has many uncommon habits. This might be a clue to aid us in determining his exact identity. Audrey instinctively believed that the notebook was her target. Hence, she only leaned in a little. Indeed, the black cover had unobvious patterns. Together, they outlined an abstract image of a dragon. From Michel's tone and minute expressions, his interest is focused on the content and not the item itself. He doesn't particularly treasure it. I have a high chance of purchasing it. Audrey calmly made a judgment as she turned her head. She then smiled at Michel Douth and said, "What are the uncommon habits exactly?" Enjoys using short sentences, very simple and short ones, Michel described in a flaunting tone. Audrey was always a good listener. She looked at him with a smile as she listened with focused attention. This made Michel speak more. As she listened, she suddenly felt that the knight's grammatical habits were somewhat familiar. That is, Audrey's eyes darted around slightly as she quickly remembered the source of the familiarity. This was a grammatical habit of dragoons, which she had diligently mastered. A knight who knows dragoons and even used it in the critical stage of his growth. It's no wonder that the psychology alchemists wished to obtain the notebook he left behind. Audrey was enlightened as she stopped her wandering thoughts. She happily and seriously discussed the problem that stemmed from such grammatical habits with Michel Douth. Soon, they concluded the discussion over the notebook as Michel began introducing the other items. Time passed as the tour slowly came to an end. Audrey had planned on raising her request of purchasing the notebook to the next meeting in order to make her goal less obvious. However, in a friendly atmosphere and with the naturalness of their conversation, she sharply sensed that it was an opportunity. Hence, with the powers of lie, she made her cheeks blush red. "Mr. Douth, the helmet from the Sorin royalty that originates from the White Rose War is a keepsake of my ancestors. Pardon my presumptuous, but can I buy it from you? Also, the notebook of the 20-year war. I'm very impressed by the knight that stood firm for Sonia Island and also wish to have it. I know it's not a polite request, but I wish that you can understand how I feel. Of course, you have the right to decline." Her eyes moved as she obviously darted them around, partially deliberate and truthful to express her lack of confidence and embarrassment. Michel subconsciously moved his gaze away as he said with a hoarse and slow voice, "I'm a collector. I won't sell my collection." His tone and the words he used aren't firm enough in the intel I previously gathered. He's a gentleman who values his reputation greatly. Using cash to purchase his collection is probably unacceptable. The reason why the psychology alchemists didn't get someone else to complete the mission is firstly because I have a way of earning contribution points, and secondly, it probably took the associate professor's attitude towards such matters in mind. I have to change my approach. Before the visit, Audrey had already carefully decided of different tests according to the intel she received. After some thought, she changed topics. "Mr. Douth, I heard that you're requesting Stone University to build an ancient relic research center." "Yes, that has been my goal for the past few years." Michel looked at Audrey and answered frankly. Audrey smiled faintly and said, "I'm very interested in the research in this area. I also feel a deep respect for you and hope to see your wish fulfilled." "Well, I'm planning on donating £1,000, a nearby piece of land spanning 2,000 Rs 1, and a manor with rather good returns to the faculty you are from at Stone University. I hope to have a non-profit basic relic search and preservation foundation set up. I know it's not a lot, but I will drum up support from the ladies and gentlemen I know in order to get them to make a certain amount of contributions. Mr. Douth, I think you're the most professional relic collector and researcher I know. I'm wondering if you're willing to be the person in charge of this non-profit foundation. 2,000 Rs of land near the university. That's worth about £6,000. Together with the manor and the cash, Miss Audrey would be donating nearly £10,000 with such a non-profit relic search and preservation foundation. The difficulties I would encounter to get my research grants approved would be drastically lowered." Michel paused for a few seconds before revealing a sincere smile. He bowed solemnly and said, "My honourable lady, the importance you place on academia has left me touched. Its glow is enough to match your beauty and upbringing. I believe I have no reason to reject your invitation. I've already recorded the contents of the notebook. I will send it and the helmet to your residence tonight. Treat it as a gift from a sincere friend. Success." Audrey was delighted as she wished to praise herself. However, she appeared reserved and indifferent. She didn't do anything that was improper. "It's my honour," she said earnestly. Although the two items were definitely not worth £10,000, it wouldn't result in any loss on her part. In her plans, this suggestion contained 3 important goals which yielded 3 returns. The first goal was naturally to obtain the item and complete the mission. She would then successfully obtain the hypnotist potion formula from the psychology alchemists. The second goal was to enhance her prestige, standing, and image via donating to academic research and the preservation of ancient relics. This was something most nobles and tycoons needed to do. Even if the donation wasn't today, Audrey would have to donate £3,000 or more to the various charitable organizations. Therefore, she believed that her father, Earl Hall, wouldn't stop her from doing this with a few of her properties. The third goal was that by having a foundation that focused on the search and preservation of ancient relics, it made it easier for her to come into contact with historical records or mysterious items of value. Audrey didn't need to personally do anything. All she needed to do was sit at home to receive items that might be beneficial to her. It was equivalent to using £10,000 to produce even more money to establish her own faction. Of course, if Michel Douth hadn't accepted this exchange, then she had other plans. The kingdom's Higher Education Commission had someone from the Hall family, as well as noble friends she knew. As long as the associate professor had anything he needed, she was certain that she had the means to satisfy him. However, Audrey didn't like such methods. She had a nagging feeling that it was shady and would harm the public interest. After discussing the matter, Audrey stayed for a little longer and chatted idly for about 15 minutes. It made the wrapping up process not as sharp and abrupt. Following that, she first left Michelle's house and rode her carriage back to the Hall family's villa in Stone City. Past 8 in the evening, she received the Soren royalties helmet and a notebook from the 20-year war. Audrey wore a pair of white silk gloves and sat before her desk with piqued interest. She placed the helmet to the side as she began flipping through the content in the notebook. She discovered that the records were sparse. The early records indicated how the knight who was stationed in the ancient Elvish island had learned how to brew Sonia blood wine, how he chased after women, how he spent the boring days. In the later records, it entered the period of the 20-year war. It mainly included his cursing of the people of Visak, his grumbling about his companions, and the consideration towards his plans to stand fast. It also included the end of how the Sonia island was first lost. Apart from the grammatical habits being similar to Dragwan's, there aren't any serious problems. Nor can I find any hidden clues Audrey found as she closed the notebook. She had used methods derived from mysticism to do her checks, but they were to no avail. This made her unwilling to waste time as she planned to turn it into the psychology alchemists. As her thoughts raced, she suddenly had a new idea. Mr. World and Mr. Hanged Man will often consider problems from different angles to provide suggestions. Should I learn from them? Well, viewing it from a different point of view, if the content of the notebook isn't problematic, would the physical item actually be what the psychology alchemists are after? What's so special about it? I didn't discover anything. It belongs to a knight who's accustomed to using Dragwans. That knight must have experienced something divination. Yes, divination. Perhaps I can find the knight's final location using divination with the help of the notebook. And this might be related to a dragon. Since it's a dragon, there's a high chance that it's a mind dragon, a representative of the spectator pathway. Clues involving it would indeed be something the psychology alchemists will pay close attention to. Audrey, that's some nice thinking. Audrey's eyes turned crystal clear as it seemed to hide a clear resplendence. She couldn't help but turn her head and looked at the golden retriever sitting by the side. Susie glanced at her owner and barked. Audrey, do you want me to praise you? No, there's no need. Audrey turned her head back, feeling a little embarrassed. Then, she discovered an important question. She wasn't able to divine things herself, or it could be said that the revelation that she received from divination would be highly inaccurate. There's no way to confirm it. No, I can seek Mr. Fool's help. A secret deed ritual. It can only be performed on my body and not towards an external object. Artificial sleepwalking. It's similar to secret deed rituals, so it wouldn't do as well. Sacrifice it to Mr. Fool and get him to do the divination before bestowing it back to me. No, that won't work. It will appear rather disrespectful. He isn't my father or teacher, but a real god. Using such a method is way too casual and somewhat sacrilegious. Audrey's thoughts slowly went from Mr. Fool to divination. Although she was rather incapable of divination, she had a certain level of understanding and the corresponding knowledge. She soon locked on to a particular method of divination. It was to seek the help of a third party's strength, an unknown or mysterious existence, via a certain ritual. The most classic example of such a method was magic mirror divination. Yes, it's indeed very dangerous, but the danger stems from the possibility that the target is filled with malice, or one that can cause a person to break down immediately. But I don't have such worries. I can seek Mr. Fool's help. Audrey blinked and held down her agitation as she said to the golden retriever, Susie, guard the door outside. I will use a mysticism method to study this notebook. Didn't you use them before? Susie asked, puzzled. She's getting harder to fool. Audrey's eyes darted around as she said confidently, I plan on using magic mirror divination. Don't worry, I'll make the plea to a safe existence. All right. Susie determined that Audrey was speaking the truth. She took a few steps before turning around to exhort her. Audrey, you need to be careful about being possessed by a mysterious existence. I know, Audrey replied without feeling worried at all. From her point of view, if Mr. Fool really wanted to do something to her, he had countless opportunities in the past. There was no reason for him to wait until this day. After Susie opened and closed the door by herself and went out, Audrey sat in front of her desk and recited the honorific name of the Fool to request the use of magic mirror divination. After a while, Klein, who was on the future, went to the bathroom and headed above the grey fog. There, he heard Miss Justice's prayer. That can be done, that's right. As a mysterious and unknown existence, I can be the third force in a magic mirror divination. Klein allowed it while feeling amused. Audrey immediately picked up the notebook, sat in front of the dresser, and lit a candle while facing the mirror. With the curtains drawn tightly and all the lights extinguished in the room, Audrey followed the requirements of magic mirror divination and completed the corresponding preparations. Of course, she didn't specially choose a specific time, as there wasn't any need to be that troublesome when getting Mr. Fool's help. Looking at the candles and reflected light in front of her, as well as her reflection, Audrey picked up a bottle of extract in excitement and some unease. She then dripped a few droplets onto the dim flame. As the mild and refreshing fragrances filled her nose, for some baffling reason, Audrey recalled the times when she was still a mysticism enthusiast. In the beginning, she would also commit all kinds of mistakes. She would realize that she had forgotten to prepare the essential oils and extracts that would please the deity at a critical moment during the ritual. All she could do was make do with perfume, and her attempts no doubt failed. In fact, according to the information which Mr. Fool shared, he would similarly respond even if I had used my perfume. Audrey exhaled slightly and, using cogitation, calmed herself down. She knew that her uncontrolled thoughts weren't ordinary behavior coming from her. The tiny bit of anticipation and nervousness had been magnified by lie. After making sure she was in an optimal state of mind, Audrey clasped her hands and pressed them to her mouth and nose as if in prayer. She sincerely chanted softly, the fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. The secret incantation gently echoed 7 times as Audrey felt the surrounding darkness of the inclusion of something which was somewhat indescribable. It was like an undercurrent hidden beneath the water surface. Looking up, Audrey reached out her right hand and passed it through the still candle flame and stroked the mirror's surface from top to bottom. At this point, the magic mirror divination was basically done. If the mysterious and unknown existence's interest was piqued, it would respond through the mirror. Above the grey fog, in the ancient and magnificent palace, Klein looked at the crimson star representing Miss Justice expand and contract as it rippled with an illusory glow. Finally, it was tainted with a nearly black feeling of serenity. It condensed into a circular halo the size of a mirror that appeared to lead to the outer world. It's different from past rituals. Interesting. Klein leaned back into his chair and extended his spirituality to make contact with the black circular hole. Silently, his vision changed. The long bronze table and the crimson star overlapped with the spacious room which was illuminated with candlelight, becoming distinct once again. At this moment, Klein felt that a mirror had become an extension of his body or eye. It allowed him to clearly see and interfere with the real world despite being above the grey fog. Yes, clearly, all the objects in Klein's vision no longer looked blurry as they appeared distinctly in his eyes. His gaze suddenly froze for 2 seconds. In front of him was a golden-laced, white-dressed lady. Her long blonde hair was casually tied up as they smoothly and luxuriantly flowed down. Her emerald eyes reflected a somewhat palish flame, looking as deep as the ocean and also as pure as a gemstone. Her facial features and the shape of her face were matched with a stunning beauty. Her bearing and elegance were clear and pure. Klein shifted his gaze away as he felt guilty for some baffling reason. I nearly imagined her to be a demoness of quite a high sequence. Thankfully, I recalled in time that Miss Justice is a beyonder of the spectator pathway. It's impossible for her to become a demoness. The smell of this extract isn't bad. Very unique, it has a very subtle feeling. The mystical item created from that faceless beyond a characteristic. Miss Justice made it into a necklace. Klein's gaze landed on the mystical item which was disguised as a diamond necklace. Then, he heard Miss Justice say with utmost anticipation, "Mirror, mirror, please tell me the location of the owner of this notebook." Audrey knew that she was asking Mr. Fool, but mirror, mirror were words she had always wanted to recite from the stories she had heard from a young age. She finally had a chance to use it in practice. The failures in the past don't count. Yes, Audrey nodded inwardly. Klein instantly looked at the black notebook placed between Miss Justice and the candle. He discovered that his spirituality could easily spread out with the help of the mirror. He could hold the divination medium as though he was using his hand. Above the grey fog, he quickly wrote the corresponding divination statement. The location of the original owner of the notebook. With one hand holding a notebook and another hand holding a piece of paper, Klein recited as he leaned back in his chair. With the help of cogitation, he quickly fell into a deep sleep. Audrey looked at the mirror intently with her emerald eyes, awaiting Mr. Fool's reply. After a few seconds, she saw ripples being produced on the mirror's surface. It's a success. Magic mirror divination really works. Audrey's eyes widened as they reflected the scenes flashing inside the mirror. It was a view of a village from above. The scene zoomed in as the dragon drawings on the various buildings gradually turned clear. A cathedral quickly occupied the mirror in its entirety before being replaced by the cemetery attached by it. Finally, the scene was fixed on a tombstone in a corner. On were words that had turned blurry as a result of the elements. The only thing that could still be discerned was the name, Linda Lyra. At this moment, the mirror suddenly darkened before restoring to normal. It reflected Audrey and the candle in front of her once again. Isn't this the village which had the customs of dragon worship? The knight who wrote the notebook is named Linda Lyra, and is from that village. He returned to his hometown after the loss of the 20-year war and stayed there until his death. Or was he sent back to his hometown as a corpse? The village is in East Chester County. Stone City is also part of East Chester County. So it's very understandable that the notebook which Associate Professor Michelle obtained stems from there. There's indeed a mind dragon living in the sea of collective subconscious over there. Feeling enlightened, Audrey thanked Mr. Fool and ended the magic mirror divination. Under the candlelight's illumination, she stared at the notebook for a moment before deciding to hand it over. She wanted to know what the psychology alchemists would divine or figure out. At the very least, the present me lacks the strength to come into contact with that mind dragon. That's all I can do. Besides, even if the psychology alchemists really discover anything and benefits from it, once I slowly rise up the ranks in the organization, some of that will belong to me. Audrey's mood very quickly turned positive once again. Above the grey fog, Klein rapped the corner of the long bronze table. With Miss Justice's description, he made his judgment. The notebook in the village had something to do with the dragon, and dragons often implied treasure. What a pity. Miss Justice's strength is lacking. Otherwise, I would have encouraged her to explore it and pray to the sea god if something happens while I provide support to her via various means. Yes, it's too dangerous for her. It can only be set aside for now if the psychology alchemists didn't discover anything. Perhaps we can attempt it in the future. Klein suppressed his regret as he recalled the experience of the magic mirror divination. This kind of divination is extremely advantageous for the third party. There's almost no price to be paid to connect to the real world. If I so wished, I could have torn out the mirror in my spirit body form. But to the user, it's indeed dangerous. They will appear under the sights of an unknown existence without any protection. From there, they can be possessed, controlled, cursed, and corrupted. Klein sighed from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't worried that Miss Justice would abuse magic mirror divination, as she had the best and safest target to pray to. There was no need for her to seek anyone else. And it would be me. Klein retracted his finger and sat at the end of the long bronze table and waited in silence for 20 to 30 seconds. Soon, he returned to the real world. He didn't stay too long since he was on the future. There was someone watching him from the dark. After leaving the bathroom and putting away Azite's copper whistle and Will Orseptin's paper crane, Klein glanced at the crimson moon which had been shrouded by clouds as he pondered silently for a moment. He put on his half-top hat, pulled open the door, and went into the corridor. After taking a few steps forward, Klein deliberately slowed his footsteps and glanced at the first room on the left through the corner of his eye. Based on his judgment, the mysterious pair of eyes that were silently observing him on the deck during the day was in that room. Klein walked slower and slower as he nearly stopped in front of the door. He didn't hide the extension of his left palm as he reached for the handle when scenes naturally surfaced in his mind. Not far behind the door was a clothes rack with nothing hanging on it. Faint starlight scattered across the clean floorboards. There was a sense of solitude and serenity that lacked the aura of humans. The windows had opened at some point in time as the sea breeze blew in from the outside, lifting the curtains which weren't too heavy. There's no one there. Klein had planned on probing the area, but he immediately retracted his left palm and walked towards the stairs as though nothing had happened. When he arrived on the deck and was taking in the cold night breeze, Klein strolled on the starboard with a cold and casual expression as though his main goal was to come out for a stroll. Suddenly, he saw a man sitting ahead of him. The man was wearing dungarees and a white shirt. Frankly, Klein didn't stop as he approached. The man sensed something as he turned his body halfway around to look at the person approaching. He was none other than poison expert Frankly, but he no longer wore a smile. Streaming down the corner of his mouth was blood-red liquid. Klein pricked up his brows without saying a word. Frankly suddenly raised his hands and grabbed a silver-scaled fish that wasn't struggling. He said in depression, "It failed. Their lifespan is shorter than I imagined. It's impossible to breed them, even if they are planted in the ground." As he spoke, he raised the silver-scaled fish in his right hand and bit down on it. "That's good, otherwise, I'm really afraid of the kind of abominations you would create, so you are drowning your sorrows with alcohol. No, fish." Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief. Klein couldn't go against his own wishes to console Frankly, nor could he bring himself to tell Frankly that not being able to breed red wine fish was a good thing. All he could do was pretend that this was a trivial problem and not provide a response. He walked 2 steps diagonally and circled around the starboard before looking far into the undulating sea. By then, the clouds high in the sky had thinned. The crimson moon's moonlight brightened up the rather dark night. In such an environment, Klein could see the nearby scenery. There were dark clouds that hung low, and he discovered a hurricane swishing back and forth, encompassing an unknown swath of sea. Under the illumination of the silver lightning, fine rain danced amidst the wind, forming a scene that resembled the dawn of the apocalypse. Such a terrifying disaster was only a few nautical miles, or even shorter from the future, but the future didn't seem affected. Only the wind had become a little stronger. This is the meaning of a safe sea route, to advance by the side of a storm without a good navigator. Just traveling normally might push the ship into a disaster. Klein turned his head to look where the ship was heading. He saw a little illumination and fog being emanated. The visibility was extremely low, and using just the naked eye was very difficult to discern if they were in a dangerous or safe zone. Such situations weren't obvious west of Orevi Island. But here, it was common once they took the secret sea route. Klein was just about to retract his gaze when he saw a black, massive object seemingly hiding in the periphery of the storm. A sea monster. He suddenly recalled some of the rumors he had heard at the different bars he had been to. After steering away from the safe sea route, it's very easy to encounter all kinds of monsters. Some of them are behemoths and possess intense offensive power. Once they surfaced from the sea, they could finish it in one mouthful. The future didn't stop advancing. Before long, it closed the gap between it and a gloomy but massive object. Klein finally managed to discern the entity's appearance and discovered that it wasn't a sea monster, but a gigantic sailboat which was even larger than the future. The sailboat was nearly 200 meters long. With its bow and stern raised high, it appeared like a crescent. Its surface was black. The cannons were arranged in 3 rows in an untidy manner on the side of the ship. There was order from top to bottom. Apart from the mast, the portions that extended out of the deck were similarly tall and massive. It was at least equivalent to a 5-story building. This ship's most odd feature was that it only had one sail, and on it was the drawing of a black tulip. The deaf announcer, a heavy voice sounded in Klein's ears. At some point in time, Franklin had thrown the silver-scaled fish, whose blood had been replaced with red wine, away and approached his side. The first mate, who had a bounty of 7,000 pounds, held his head heavy as his muscles remained tense. It was as though an attack would be launched any time from the minute changes of the gigantic sailboat. Deaf announcer, Klein was first taken aback before he recalled what the name represented. It was one of the most legendary and infamous ships on the 5 seas. It was the flagship of the King of Immortality, Agalito. We actually encountered one of the 4 kings. Klein clicked his tongue silently as he uncontrollably entered a highly vigilant state. However, he maintained a superficial level of indifference and calm as he continued looking at the deaf announcer. Recalling how the second mate of the deaf announcer, Slaughterer Tishaes, who had a bounty of 9,500 pounds, had recently appeared in Nez and warned him, Tishaes came to an understanding. He was no longer puzzled as to why he would bump into the deaf announcer not far from the Gardas archipelago. After putting aside this question, he made connections with even more rumors. And among these rumors, there were a number which could be confirmed to be an actual description. King of Immortality Agalito is a middle-aged man who's so pale that he's on the brink of rotting at any moment. The bounty placed on him by a single country reached as high as 100,000 pounds. His former enemies are all dead, regardless if they were pirates, adventurers, or members of a naval fleet. Only the other 3 members of the 4 kings remained alive. He has never entered into direct combat with an official demigod. He is extremely restrained in such matters. No one really knows his exact sequence. No one knows what his beyond the powers are. He's cruel by nature and enjoys killing. He can launch an attack on any person or any ship at random. He liked to find excuses to rip apart promises. Other than his nickname as the King of Immortality, he was often nicknamed the Untrustworthy. Thankfully, I'm on the future. The King of Immortality will likely give Admiral of Stars a free pass. After all, she's one of the 7 pirate admirals. No, the 4 kings and the pirate admirals can cooperate or be at odds normally. Apart from the pirate convention organized by the King of the 5 Seas with the King of Immortality's character, he might not leave any chance of survival. Just as this thought flashed in Klein's mind, he heard a deep, rumbling horn. Whoosh! The sailors who were resting in the cabin jolted awake immediately. Without wearing their clothes, they ran to the different cannons on deck to make preparations to do battle. The future instantly went from a peaceful state to a combative one. Klein turned his head and looked up. He saw that the captain's windows were already open. Katlia wore the usual black dress as she stood there and observed the deaf announcer. She wasn't wearing the thick glasses, and her pitch-black eyes were tainted with some purple, making them mysterious and deep. Indeed, she's also worried about a sudden attack from the King of Immortality. Klein retracted his gaze and looked at the deaf announcer, which had its tail raised up. At this moment, the 2 ships had just passed each other by. The pirates could see their counterparts on the other ship. Similarly, those pirates were also looking over. They maintained a silence resembling that of a statue, as though they had zero emotional fluctuations, brandishing their knives and blowing at the guns. They were being extremely provocative. At that moment, just a matchstick was enough to trigger the tense nerves and begin a war. Finally, the deaf announcer didn't take any actions. It continued silently anchored on the spot, watching the future pass it by before it distanced itself. Few at Klein's side, Franklin didn't conceal his exultation. He produced a smile and said to Klein, Hey, there has always been many rumors about the King of Immortality's strength. Others say that he's really a demigod, while others say that he's only a sequence 5. He is able to reach the level of the sequence 4 thanks to the deaf announcer. But regardless, he has lived long enough. Tell me, do you think crossbreeding him and my fishes will enhance their survivability? Frank suddenly had an idea. First, you need to capture the King of Immortality. Otherwise, make him interested in your fish. Klein lampooned before calmly saying, You can discuss it with him. Frank Lee was taken aback as he sighed, depressed. He won't agree to it. He will plant me into the soil. Just as he said that, the deaf announcer which had opened the gap with the future suddenly turned its sails. A shrill laughter which was filled with malice sounded from several hundred meters away as it blanketed the future. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. The laughter resounded constantly. It switched from being hoarse to chaotic, sounding like ravings or singing at times. The sailors on deck fell to the ground one after another as they tried hard to cover their ears, but all they could do was struggle in pain. A number of beyonders began to produce fish scales on their bodies. Klein was similarly affected. He felt that his brain was instantly injected with all kinds of thoughts. There were the good, the bad, the bright, and the dark. They were abnormally disordered as they combined with the constantly changing laughter to produce a swelling feeling that could burst one's brain. Klein's facial expression distorted slightly as inconspicuous flesh tendrils began to start wriggling under his skin. If he hadn't experienced the true creator's ravings and Mr. Dawes' cry for help, or suffer similar torment when he passed the grey fog each time, giving him a certain level of resistance, Klein would definitely be like poison expert Frank Lee, pressing his head, kneeling down with a ferocious expression to resist the pain brought from the terrifying laughter. Klein noticed that some short orange hair was growing from Frank's face, making him seem to transform into a bear. At that moment, the symbols and magical labels on the future's walls, deck, and mast lit up. They became like a resplendent sea of stars in a moonless night. The terrifying laughter, which was either sharp or hoarse, didn't weaken, but everyone was distanced from one another in a second. The sounds that came from a further distance away sounded empty and illusory. Klein's swelling head instantly received reprieve as he used the rest of his strength to look up. Behind the opened windows in the captain's cabin, the Admiral of Stars' face had additional traces of gloominess, and they looked like they would crack apart at any moment, producing horrible items. At that moment, Catlea's palms pressed down on the windowsill as bits of starlight swirled around her, seemingly matching the future, which was on the resplendent sea. Whoosh! A squall stirred for no reason as the ship began its own adjustment. Despite the future having so many of its sailors down, it sped up instead of slowing down. It quickly opened up a gap from the death announcer. Klein looked at the room with the mysterious pair of eyes that observed the deck, and he discovered that the windows were rattling from the strong winds without any signs of abnormalities. Whoosh! Amidst the strong winds, starlight descended to form a swath of floating ice as they dragged the future into a rapid flight. Finally, the death announcer vanished behind it. The terrifying laughter which could make a person lose control or go mid turned more illusory and distant. Frank Lee lowered his hands and panted before barely recovering. Many of the sailors on the deck were still tumbling about and struggling in extreme pain, but their condition didn't worsen. This ability of the King of Immortality is truly impressive. There's almost no way to defend against it. It's no wonder he's one of the four kings. Klein frowned slightly as he sighed. Although he was experienced and rather knowledgeable, this was the first time he was being directly attacked by a demigod in the true sense of the word. He discovered that even Agalito, who was ranked last among the four kings, similarly made him feel weak as though it was impossible to resist. With Agalito's character, will he make the death announcer pursue us? Although there's a high chance he would wait for Slaughter Clichés to return, the possibility cannot be excluded if he chases up. I'll pray to myself and use the sea god scepter to give him a maelstrom and a thunderstorm to wipe him out. After making the decision, he once again looked at Catlea. The pirate admiral's expression was already ghastly pale. However, there were no longer any signs of darkness. The starlight that twirled around her slowly extinguished one after another. Following the complete disappearance of the surrounding astral glow, Catlea lowered her head and said to Frank Lee, who was slowly recovering, "Let them calm down." She was referring to the sailors who were still struggling in pain. Just as she said that, Catlea shrunk her body back as the windows closed. At that instant, Klein vaguely saw a green vine grow upwards, covering the Admiral of Stars in layers. As he didn't sense any danger or wickedness, he intuitively believed that it was a method in mysticism which Mam Hermit used to treat her injuries and recover her energy. A power of her beyond a pathway? Or is it from some mystical item she possesses? She began treatment without any worry and allowed Frank to deal with the chaos on the ship. She's not afraid that the death announcer would be able to chase up to us. How far did the future fly in that last pounce? Klein no longer held his neck up as he turned to look at Frank Lee. This first mate, who was both a poison expert and a capable doctor, had already retrieved a coiled soft tube from the pocket of his dungarees. It was connected to a small glass bottle, and on the other side was an embedded thin and sharp needle. A sedative I concocted, Frank Lee said with a forced smile while still having pangs of fear. I've bought something similar before. They were all given to zombie Marek. Klein surveyed the area and said, this might not be enough. No, it's not for them. I need a helper. They will receive the help of beer which comes with a sedative effect. Ha ha, they're often rowdy once they're drunk, so I've added the necessary elements in most of the alcohol buckets, Frank explained in passing. Sparking their drinks without any notice, Klein nearly twitched the corner of his mouth. At that moment, he had a deep appreciation for the aptness of the nickname Poison Expert. Simply because he found the pirates rowdy when drunk, Frank had added a modified sedative to most of the alcoholic beverages without any sense of guilt or shame. It was as though he was doing something very ordinary. This fellow is a really straight and warm person in certain aspects, but in other aspects, he's more terrifying than the devil. This is because he doesn't believe that what he does is evil. How did the Church of Mother Earth produce such a crazy scientist? Klein controlled his expression and followed Frank Lee from a distance and found the bosun, Nina, who was squirming in the shadows of the bulkhead. This pirate with an exaggerated figure was slumped there, writhing in pain. She kept scratching the deck, producing ear-piercing sounds as bloody marks were left behind. Just watching the scene made Klein feel pain in his fingers. Gemmen, help me press her down to prevent her from struggling. Frank raised the needle and tube in his hand. Klein didn't object to it, but he didn't say a word. He calmly crouched by the side and pressed down on Nina's shoulders. He felt his hands slip the moment he touched her, finding it difficult to grab her. It was as though she wasn't a lady, but a gigantic fish covered in slippery scales. Klein instantly corrected his actions. Using a clown's precise control, he grabbed Nina firmly by the shoulders. However, Nina's struggling was surprisingly strong, far greater than Klein's. Soon, he felt his fingers turn sore as he could hardly continue. As expected of a sequence 7 Beyonder from the Sailor Pathway, while I'm not a Beyonder who excels when it comes to physical strength if not for the need to feed it. I can activate creeping hunger and switch to steal Mavity's soul and use the strength of a zombie as a most suitable response. As these thoughts ran through his mind, Klein saw Frank approach, crouch down, and press his knee onto Nina's back. His muscles bulged as he quickly stopped Nina's struggling. A Beyonder from the Planter Pathway has quite a lot of physical strength as well, however, Mr. Frank Lee. It's probably difficult for you to get a girlfriend if you use such crude manners against a lady. Of course, you definitely don't mind. You could totally let your child grow from the soil. Klein lampooned as he watched Frank Lee inject the needle into the back of Nina's hand. As the small bottle of sedatives was injected, Nina stopped her attempts at struggling. Klein released his hands and stood up. After a few seconds, Nina combed her hair and rolled to her feet. She grumbled at Frank Lee, "Why must you always be so rough like a bear? Can't you try a different method?" As she spoke, she stretched her arms without concealing the pained expression on her face. Unlike the dive from earlier, she was now wearing a linen shirt and a brown coat. She looked no different from an ordinary pirate. Frank wasn't fazed by Nina's complaints as he asked in puzzlement, "How was I rough?" "All right, let's not argue on this topic. Let's help them first. Get the beer barrel out. Let's work together to make them drink. Gemmen, you don't mind participating in this, right?" Klein shot a glance at the sailors on the deck. After contemplating for a few seconds, he asked, "The goal is to let them calm down." "That's right." Frank Lee nodded heavily. "Can I just knock them unconscious?" Klein asked calmly. "This has almost the same effects as a sedative beer, and it's more efficient," he added inwardly. Nina turned her head in surprise and was momentarily stumped speechless. Frank Lee thought seriously for a moment. "Okay, all right." Klein walked to a cutlass he had long noticed, picked it up, and used the dull edge to strike it at its owner. Bang! Through his precise control, the pirate who was rolling in pain calmed down and fell unconscious. Nina's expression froze for a second before she recovered. She then slowed down when passing by Klein. She suppressed her laughter as she said, "I've heard rumors of you, but I never expected you to be more exaggerated than the rumors. Usually, it should be the opposite. Yes, your thoughts are very, very special. Completely different from others, and they're closer to those of Frank's. This is probably why he's able to treat you as a friend in such a short time. No, there are differences among lunatics. Gemmen Sparrow hasn't reached the level of Frank yet," Klein observed silently and gave such a reply inwardly. He ignored Nina and held the cutlass and walked across the deck, knocking the sailors unconscious and waiting for them to wake up naturally. Frank wished to do the same, but he gave up his rash thoughts when he was asked by Nina if he could guarantee that he only knocked them unconscious instead of killing them. He entered the cabin and brought out a beer barrel and acted according to his original plan. Bum, bum, bum. Klein struck as he walked all the way to the bow. At this moment, an elder in his 50s with a pointed bonnet had gradually come round. When he saw the cold and crazy adventurer approach, he hurriedly tried to stand up and blurted out, "No, I don't need it. I'm already fine. I'm fine." There's no need to explain. It's very clear Klein held back his amusement and turned for the bow. At this moment, the elder introduced himself. "I'm a navigator of the future, Ottolov." Navigator. Klein turned his head and discovered several books dropped around Ottolov. They were either spread on the ground face up or down, flat or sideways. "Ha ha, I fell from above and brought them with me. They nearly went mad," Ottolov explained. Klein shifted his gaze towards his eyes and discovered the colors of the deep sea in his blue eyes. "It's not the pair of eyes that were observing me in the day, but this feeling is somewhat similar to the Admiral of Stars. They are of the same pathway." Klein retracted his gaze and watched Nina and Frank Lee calm the other sailors. Just as he was about to look back to see if the death announcer had continued its pursuit, Ottolov suddenly shouted, "Be careful." Whoosh! A huge wave struck the bow, causing the future to shake vigorously. If not for his balancing ability as a clown, Klein would have fallen like Frank. And when the huge spray pattered down like rain, it drenched his half-top hat and double-breasted frock coat. There should be a steam iron here, right? The act of a crazy adventurer washing his clothes doesn't violate his persona. It's weird if he doesn't wash his clothes. I should have worn clothes in the style of the Roasted Archipelago natives. At that instant, Klein felt a series of heartache. He saw a storm ahead with huge waves coming one after another as they surged high up like mountains. He could sense the crazy winds and the rumbling thunder. We've come to the boundaries of the safe sea routes. The flight from just now might have allowed us to lose the death announcer's tail, but it has also diverted the ship from its path. Klein watched as Ottolov, Nina, and Frank, as well as bloodless Heath Doyle, who had appeared at some point in time, wake up the sailors as they took their places. They frantically and busily began to steer the future. Through their hard work, the future changed directions in time and tore through the gigantic waves and dodged the bolts of lightning before returning to the safe sea route. After everything calmed down, Klein released the charm from the sea god domain and breathed a sigh of relief. Looking back, he saw no signs of the death announcer's pursuit. He finally eased up and found that there was nothing calm about the night. After surveying the area and seeing the pirates rub their heads or gasp for breath, looking exhausted and on the brink of collapse, Klein left the deck, feeling a slight guilty conscience. He walked to the cabin and sighed inwardly. "We just left the Gardas Archipelago recently and the ship was nearly destroyed. The search for mermaids really doesn't seem simple." Following the staircase to the upper level, Klein walked past the captain's cabin and slowed down. He observed for a moment and saw green leaves covering the crack in the door. Everything was isolated. He shifted his gaze and returned to his room. He considered the matter of praying to the fool before going above the grave fog to grasp the nearby waters and search for traces of the death announcer by responding. He wanted to let the King of Immortality Agalito, who attacked others for no baffling reason, to experience the same treatment as he did. No, there are eyes watching. I should try my best not to do such things. Besides, it will only teach the King of Immortality a lesson and not seriously injure him. It's not worth the risk. I shouldn't let my anger get the better of my rationality. I'll think about it again after advancing successfully. Klein repressed his urge. Back land, outside the steam locomotive station. Force wore a finely checkered black veiled hat with embedded blue flowers and stood by the hall at the station's entrance, awaiting her teacher, Dorian Gray. The drizzle on the streets and the cold winds blowing underground had made this female author tremble slightly. She felt that she had underestimated Back London spring. "I wonder what CO is doing that makes her busy all year round." Sigh, she said that she wouldn't even get out of bed when her father was still alive. Apart from going to the bathroom, both food and water would be served to her by her servants. Now, she's leaving early in the morning every day and only returning late at night regardless of the weather. She has completed one mission after another, capturing one fugitive after another. With this in mind, Force couldn't help but admire CO. Last week, this female sheriff had already paid off her debt and had even saved up £200. I have to say that, as a beyond the job, a sheriff is really suited to being a bounty hunter. Of course, the choices available to her are limited to low sequence beyond as Force's thoughts wandered as her gaze that was directed outwards had suddenly caught sight of a familiar figure. It was a man of medium build, and he was dressed in a black suit, the most popular attire in Lowen. He wore a half-top hat, and in a rare instance, his shoulders appeared broad. It was broad in an almost exaggerated sense. He was none other than Force's teacher, one of the few remaining members of the Abraham family, Dorian Gray Abraham. Force was delighted as she immediately went over with her umbrella in hand. With so many people on the streets, she didn't directly approach him. However, her gaze met his and saw him raise his clenched right fist towards the first button on his black suit. This means danger. Force's expressionlessly diverted her gaze away. She smiled as she cast her gaze to a young gentleman behind Dorian, and as though nothing happened, she passed him and walked forward. An ancient family had unimaginable experience in all kinds of matters, so Dorian Gray had long informed Force of the signals and gestures to use in urgent situations. The action from before was extremely simple. It was to inform her to stay away. The young man behind was somewhat taken aback to be stared at by the languid, mature lady. Following that, he instinctively adjusted his clothes and pressed down on his hat. Just as he finished these series of actions, Force had overtaken him and continued heading forward. Under the drizzle, Force circled the area and boarded a rental carriage and headed for Hat Trekking on Sherwood Boroughs 22 Hope Street. This was the place that Dorian Gray had reserved in advance. Having spent so many years in mysticism circles, Force, who had plenty of experience, calmly got a neighboring room and stood before the window to observe the guests that came to the inn. Finally, she saw Dorian Gray get off a carriage and walk through the door. Force quickly turned around and came to the bend of the stairwell. She covertly observed her teacher being led to his room by an attendant. After a while, she took off her hat, messed up her hair a little before coming to room 2016, and she knocked on it. Her plan was very simple. If her teacher's response wasn't problematic, she would enter the room to converse with him. If it was abnormal, she would pretend as though she had come to the wrong room or that she was a prostitute trying to get some business. Creak. The door slowly opened as Dorian looked at his student in front of him before looking both ways down the corridor. Then, he raised his right arm and spread his fingers to press on the second button of his suit. This meant that he wasn't controlled and that the abnormality was over. Force let out a silent sigh of relief and instantly entered the room. "Teacher, what happened just now?" she asked, feeling worried and concerned. Dorian closed the door and smiled wryly. "I saw someone familiar," he sighed and added, "an enemy." It was his former student who had later betrayed the Abraham family with Traveler Boulea and nearly wiped out the upper echelons of the Abraham family. According to what Dorian knew, his former student had already joined the Aurora Order and was likely one of the 22 oracles. What did he do? Is he very strong? Force asked curiously. Dorian fell silent for a few seconds and divulged a little. Lawrence, Lawborough, or Lisa, and I belonged to a particular organization. A few members betrayed and dealt a heavy blow to it. That was one of the traitors. He didn't mention it as a family, nor did he mention the conflict between bloodline members and the apprentices so as to prevent Force from getting her feelings involved. How despicable. Force immediately recalled the kind Mrs. Orlisa and the friendly and amiable Mr. Lawrence. All right, let's not chat about such unhappy matters. Dorian took out a piece of paper that had been folded a few times and handed it to Force. Here's the astrologer potion formula. Your digestion of the trick master and apprentice potions has exceeded my expectations. This is the greatest surprise I've had in the past 10 years. I specially joined the circus. Force didn't hide the fact, and she even felt that it was worth flaunting. As she spoke, she unfolded the piece of paper to read the astrologer's potion formula. At this moment, Dorian nodded in relief. I'm very sorry. Due to the previous losses, I'm unable to provide you with the main ingredients of the astrologer potion. Just treat it as a final test. However, I have prepared a gift for you. As he spoke, he took out a palm-sized notebook from his inner left pocket. Its cover looked hard, and it was entirely bronze green in color. It looked rather ancient. The notebook was comprised of 3 types of paper. The yellow type of parchment had the fewest pages, while another was a yellowish-brown goatskin of about 10 pages, while the rest was ordinary white paper. On the cover there were the words written in ancient Fisak: I came, I saw, I record. Force's gaze moved away from the astrologer potion formula and onto the notebook. She recognized it to be the item left behind by Mr. Lawrence. It was the item she had specially traveled all the way to Pritz Harbor to hand to her teacher. Dorian smiled. I believe you are no stranger to it. After Force nodded, he sighed. This is a rather potent mystical item. It can be ranked in the top 5 among all the similar items I've seen. This doesn't mean that it's more impressive than the ones ranked after it, but it's simply because the negative effects are the easiest to resolve. When the two are put together, it makes it worth a lot. What is its name? What negative side effects does it have? Force couldn't disguise her excitement and agitation. Dorian caressed the notebook's cover and said, It's called Limano's Travels, but we prefer calling it Limano's Spellbook. While this spellbook will expose you to more kinds of beyond powers, it can also allow you to record them. It will be materialized onto a particular page for long-term storage. You can use it at any time, but remember, the corresponding page will become blank again with each use, awaiting your next record. It sounds amazing. Force felt as though she was dreaming. I can record any beyond powers I see and use them once. Isn't it there's another kind of shepherd? The shepherd mentioned by Little Sun, yes, it's only limited to a single prepared battle. I wonder if I can record the beyond powers of a demigod. If it's possible, in a prepared battle, I'll be even stronger than a shepherd. Dorian seemed to read her mind as he explained in detail. It can be said so. It corresponds to a sequence 6 scribe of the apprentice pathway. It's not guaranteed that a beyond power that is higher than this sequence can be recorded. There's a chance of failure. The greater the gap, the greater the chance of failure. Furthermore, the effects will be halved. According to the experience of past users, while chances of success against a sequence 5 single quotes beyond powers is considerably high, once it reaches sequence 4, which is the level of a demigod, it becomes relatively difficult. There might not be a single instance of success within 10 attempts. And I believe no demigod will cast it again and again for you. If it's an enemy, they would have killed you 10 times over. Do you see these? The yellow parchment is specifically used to record beyond powers with godhood. There are a total of 3 pages, which is to say that even if you are very lucky, all you can record is 3 demigod beyond powers, and you can only use them each once. Although it appears to have many restrictions, making it impossible to fully produce the traveling notebook's might, it isn't an obstacle for 2 types of people. One of them is a lucky person, while the other is someone with a large organization or faction backing them. The kind which is a demigod helping Force instantly thought of seeking Mr. Fool's help to display his powers so that she could record them. However, she immediately found it sacrilegious as she hurriedly apologized inwardly. Following that, she sincerely hoped that the supposedly strongest man hermit in the Tarot Club would quickly become a demigod. Dorian noticed that Force's thoughts were going astray as he continued. The pages like goatskin can record the beyond powers of a sequence 5 or 6. There are a total of 10 pages, and the effects would be more than half of the original, roughly 70 to 80%. The remaining pages record beyond powers below sequence 6. There are a total of 25 pages, and the effects are almost equal to the original, but they are still slightly inferior. Due to some developments in the past, the spellbook still has 5 pages with beyond powers left. The rest are blank. You can test them for yourself. Dorian paused before saying with a solemn expression, before giving it to you, I have to seriously warn you that it has negative effects. After using it each time, it will make you get lost, and it's the kind that causes you to encounter danger. You have to draw a bit of your blood to smear it on the cover evenly to reduce the effects. Remember, don't underestimate getting lost. You must resolve it as quickly as possible. Yes, teacher, Force replied seriously. Dorian then handed Limano's Travels to Force. This is my gift. Teacher is really nice. Force pursed her lips and asked, what's the name of that student who betrayed you? What does he look like? If there's a chance, I wish to seek vengeance on him for both you and Mr. Lawrence. No, don't think about it. You are much weaker than him. Back when he betrayed us, he was already a scribe. Now, he might even be a traveler, Dorian said solemnly. However, you do need to remember him and avoid him. His name is Lucian. I'll draw a picture of him later. All right, Force nodded. On the future, in the pirates' dining hall, Klein met Katlia, who was exiting just as he walked in. The lady was no longer as pale as the previous night. With a pair of thick glasses, she calmly said, make your preparations. We will be arriving in those waters in a while. That fast? How far exactly did we fly last night? Klein was taken aback. Although Gem and Sparrow didn't show it on his face, Katlia seemed to notice the surprise in him. She simply explained, it's a kind of flight that makes it impossible for the deaf announcer to continue its pursuit. Just as she said that, she discovered that Gem and Sparrow had completely changed his attire. He wore a round neck shirt, a brown jacket, pantaloons with a dark-colored cap. He didn't look like an adventurer and instead resembled a native of the city of Generosity, Bayan. According to Nina, his clothes were drenched by a huge wave last night. Does he only have one set of decent clothes? Katnia recalled and found the reason. She wasn't surprised by this. She even felt that it matched Gem and Sparrow's insanity. He only had one set of decent clothes, spending the rest of his money on mystical items, beyond the weapons, spirituality charms, with the sole goal of raising his strength. It's no wonder the King of Immortality gave up. All he did was attack passing ships. There wasn't enough hatred to drive him to pursue us the entire way. Yes, in front of the four kings, senior pirate admirals still have a chance to escape to a certain degree. Almost arriving, man, I haven't completed my digestion. However, acting as the crazy adventurer yesterday seemed rather effective. The crew of the future gave a very spontaneous and warm response towards it. I should completely digest it in 2 to 3 days. And even if we entered the dangerous waters, finding mermaids wouldn't be that simple. I should have enough time. Klein nodded and suppressed his urge to ask. He planned on passing by Admiral of Stars and head to his usual spot to have breakfast. At this moment, he saw a pirate who was carrying a bluefish which was alive and kicking rush in. He went straight for a corner. Seated there was the second mate of the future, Heath Doyle. His face was nearly transparent from the paleness, and his nose bridge was rather unharmonious. The fish, which was nearly a meter long, was placed in front of Bloodless. Heath Doyle extended his hands and pressed down on the fish. He bent his body bit by bit as he inched his head downwards, plastering his face to the scales as though he was kissing it. Suddenly, the fish stiffened and, like wax meeting fire, melted rapidly and turned into a disgusting pool of flesh and blood. The flesh and blood surged into Heath Doyle's mouth like liquid as they covered his skin. Amidst the horrendous sight of the squirming, the fish and all the bones, flesh, and blood vanished. Nothing was left behind as Heath Doyle's face appeared very clean. All that was left was the bright red colour on his lips like a blooming rose. Rose Bishop, the name of the sequence, surfaced in Klein's mind. Catlier, who was beside him, also saw the scene as she nudged her glasses. Every Rose Bishop needs to replenish themselves with enough blood and flesh. That way, they can fully showcase their beyond powers and not lose control after being injured as a result of an intense battle. Her lips curled slightly as she added, however, the lunatics from the Aurora already have an inclination towards human flesh and blood. Actually, substitutes would work fine. From the looks of it, this Bloodless with a bounty of 7,600 pounds is really lucky. On the one hand, he's lucky to achieve sequence 6 at once without any abnormalities or losing control. On the other hand, joining Admiral of Stars' pirate crew is another. Without the secret knowledge that this lady who is being pursued by knowledge possesses, he might have turned into a monster that desires human flesh and blood sooner or later, even if he didn't listen to the true creator's voice. Klein sighed silently. He was increasingly convinced that the secret suppliant pathway, which was also the shepherd pathway, was the beyond pathway, which was the easiest to lose control and turn mad. Nothing came close. Even the abyss pathway, which represented evil, was slightly lacking. Klein retracted his gaze, and just as he was about to take a step forward, the entire ship jolted. In an instant, the scene ahead of the future naturally surfaced in Klein's mind. The blue sea was being separated by a gigantic crack as infinite amounts of seawater plummeted down into bottomless darkness like a waterfall. This scene was magnificent and mystical. It made one suspect if they went on Earth. Whoosh! The future wasn't able to stop in time as it rushed to the edge and quickly plummeted. Bang! 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 All the pirates in the dining hall flew up and slammed into the ceiling. Toast, white bread, butter, margarine, beer, and roasted fish flew around at random without settling down. Klein also lost his balance as he couldn't help but be thrown towards the ceiling. He extended his palm in time and pressed upwards, quickly adjusting his posture like an acrobatic act, allowing him to look less pathetic. Not far away, Nina showcased her stunning balance. With the help of the ceiling, she maintained her posture. Perhaps intentionally or unintentionally, she extended her feet and kicked Frank to send the poison expert flying diagonally to a beer barrel, drenching him with pale yellow liquid. At this moment, the most casual and unfazed person was Catclear. Stars swirled around her as the resplendence beneath her feet coagulated, causing her to float in midair. She wasn't affected by the sudden dip. Apart from her, Bloodless was the least pathetic. At some point in time, this Rose Bishop had blended into the shadows and disappeared. With the future about to plummet into the bottomless crevice, a plume of water surged up suddenly. It held up the ship and flew it high into the air and towards the other edge. After momentarily floating in the air, Klein believed that the future had landed stably on the surface of the sea. Once again, the charm from the sea god domain, which he held tightly in his right hand, wasn't used. At that moment, the sunlight outside the window shone inside, illuminating the mess inside the dining hall. Klein, who had long regained his balance, briskly walked to the window and saw that the endless sea seemed to be burning with golden flames. It appeared to have been noon the entire time. It was only morning moments ago. Klein looked up and narrowed his eyes to see that the sky was filled with sunlight. There were no clouds nor the sun, just a swath of golden rays. It's no wonder Arodes' description of this place is that it's no longer a real ocean, but a relic of a war between the gods. As he swept his gaze, he discovered nearby ruins which were diagonally ahead. The ruins were mostly covered by seawater. Protruding out from the surface was grey stones and stone columns that formed a peak. At the top was a dome-like object. From its angle, it was able to hold up quite a large area of space. The ruins were definitely massive in the first place. Through the transparent waters, Klein saw that its base extended to the seabed without end. These are extremely dangerous waters. At some point in time, Catlear came beside him. Klein turned his head over and waited for her to continue. Catlear's gaze was cast forward as she said somewhat wistfully, I haven't been here many times. Furthermore, all my visits happened a long time ago. My and not our, that means that it wasn't with the crew of the future, or was it back when she was a subordinate of Queen Mystic? Klein acutely noticed the terms which Admiral of Stars had used as he made a guess. Catlear didn't turn her head as she looked at the sky and sea which were covered in golden flames. No one knows where the ends of these waters are. Nor does anyone know how wide it is. Do you know what's most dangerous about this place? I should have gotten Arodes to give me a more detailed explanation. Klein honestly shook his head. Previously, he had nearly been caught by a demigod of the true creator. He had only survived thanks to the die of probability. Therefore, in the past 2 months, he didn't dare bring the radio transceiver back to the real world. He was afraid that the true creator, who was closely watching the region, would sense it. Hence, he didn't have an opportunity to contact Arodes. His original plan was to seek out Will or Septon's help through the paper crane once he approached the dangerous waters and understand the corresponding dangers of the environment. To his surprise, they had encountered King of Immortality Agalito, and the future didn't give him any time before they arrived at their destination. Behind the thick glasses, Catlear's black eyes with the purple hue glazed over for a moment. There are many ruins floating here. There are all kinds of mutated monsters. Among them include many demigods who have lost control or ancient evil creatures. This isn't the most dangerous part. If it's only because of this, these waters would have become a hunting ground for the 7 churches, a treasure trove for them to obtain high-sequence ingredients or items. Of course, there are many monsters and evil creatures who have lost control here, but they might not be real. They can kill us, but they might not leave anything behind after they are killed. Upon hearing this, Klein made the connection to the dragon of imagination, Ankh-Uelt. This dragon king could conjure anything through his imagination. Could it be that these waters were where the ancient gods of the Second Epoch fought? Klein merely frowned. Cat Clear said with an ethereal voice as she continued, "Here, you will never guess what dangers you will encounter next. Perhaps you will just melt while approaching a ruin, turning into a wax-like monster. Perhaps you might turn into a rock amidst the storms from slightly deviating from the explored sea routes and end up shattering to pieces. To beyonders at our level, that is the greatest danger." Klein turned his head slightly as he sharply asked, "What about beyonders that surpass our levels?" Cat Clear sighed and smiled. The waters here are filled with a voice that shouldn't be heard. The higher the sequence, the easier it is to hear it. Therefore, most demigods who dare explore these waters have ended up with problems. They either went mad or lost control, ending up lost here forever. It's no wonder the 7 churches don't send their experts here to reap the harvest. Most of them ended up with problems, which means that there are a small number of demigods that can survive here. Enlightened, Klein looked out the window again. At this moment, the future had closed in on the ruins. Suddenly, a loud and clear panting was heard by everyone. Whoosh! Gasp! The loud panting sounds entered Klein's ears in a slow and rhythmic manner. It left a chill running down his spine as he felt an inexplicable sense of horror, but he didn't feel any dangerous foreboding. It wasn't only him. Cat Clear, Frank Lee, and the other pirates also heard the panting sounds. They either turned their heads, looked outside, raised their weapons, or were on high alert, showcasing their rich experience. After trying to discern the source, Klein discovered that the intense panting stemmed from the ruin ahead of them. It originated from a spot between the peak made of stones and stone columns. At that moment, bloodless Heath Doyle floated out of the shadows. He clasped his head and softly grunted in pain. There's a corpse there. Corpse? A corpse that pants loudly? Klein's thoughts raced. Cat Clear, who had subconsciously removed her heavy glasses and looked towards the ruins, but her expression suddenly turned solemn. She turned her head towards the pirates in the dining hall and said, "Quick! Quickly circle around that area and do not approach it." Her voice contained a magnetic allure that jolted everyone awake. The sailors rushed out of the dining hall and headed for spots that needed help. Under Navigator of the Love and Bosun Nina's instructions, they adjusted the sails and changed direction, passing by the ruins from a relatively great distance. Only when the peak formed by stone and stone columns vanished beyond the horizon did bloodless Heath Doyle lower his hands, his expression no longer in pain. Upon seeing this scene, Klein narrowed his eyes. He felt that this Rose Bishop, the second mate of the future, might be a huge latent risk on this voyage. This wasn't because of his contempt towards beyonders of the secret suppliant pathway, but a judgment he made from combining the Admiral of Stars' description and how Heath Doyle had reacted. Just now, Heath Doyle was the only one in pain, while everyone heard the loud panting. He instinctively believed that there was a corpse buried in the ruins, and Kathleen's reaction after her observation proved his words. That means that even if Heath Doyle doesn't proactively listen to the true creator's voice, just by having the beyonder powers of a listener is enough to make him hear more than the average person, and most low and mid-sequence beyonders in ordinary environments. Hence, he was affected the most and obtained more information on the danger when we encountered the panting sounds, while being sufficiently close to the source of the sounds. Here, it doesn't mean that problems can be resolved by avoiding similar ruins. Because according to Cat Clear, these waters are filled with voices that can make a demigod lose control, voices that shouldn't be heard. If Heath Doyle were to be in an inadequate or overly adequate state one day, he might end up hearing those lethal whispers. Similarly, even if a sequence 6 Rose Bishop is inferior to a demigod who is good at listening, the gap can't be too huge. In terms of the dire probability, just 2 points, not 1 point, is enough to have Heath Doyle hear voices he shouldn't hear to go mad or lose control. I have to warn Mam Hermit, even though she should have long figured this out, aunt. Made the corresponding preparations. Klein retracted his gaze and heard his stomach groan softly. He had yet to have breakfast. At this moment, beer was splashed across the floor. Butter had been splattered everywhere. All kinds of food, roasted fish, toast, white bread, was strewn across the floor or hanging off of something. All of them had become somewhat dirty. It should still be edible by peeling off the outer layer. Klein looked at a piece of bread that was leaning on a table leg, in a dilemma on his course of action. This was at odds with Gem and Sparrow's persona. When he decided to wait for lunch, Cat Clear instructed the chef, prepare breakfast for the rest once more. Leave this to Frank. Perhaps he has uses for it. For the rearing of monsters, Klein lampooned inwardly. After a while, he finally had breakfast which wasn't as sumptuous as before. It was a smoked pork sausage and 2 utterly burnt toast, as well as a cup of unstated light beer that was treated as water. Due to them traveling through very dangerous waters with the possibilities of mishaps happening at every turn, Klein showcased his eating skills from back when he was studying in college. He only spent 1 to 2 minutes to finish the breakfast, just like he did back in his college's mess hall. He left the pirates' dining hall and came to the deck. He was having an after-meal stroll while also observing his environment. At that moment, the sea still appeared as though it was illuminated by a midday sun as it was colored gold. Klein stopped and looked into the distance and saw a point of light ahead expanding. Under the sun's illumination, the point of light was producing coruscating, multicolored lusters due to the refraction. It was like a gigantic and transparent gem. As the future continued forging ahead, the point of light gradually revealed itself. It first parted before becoming clear. It was comprised of 4 gigantic columns made of pure diamond. They were like legendary columns that held up the sea. They extended downwards and stably stood there, holding up a sizable floating island. Above the floating island, the soil was charred black without any hint of greenery. In its depths, the lights had such an abnormal brightness that it outshone the midday sky. Suddenly, there was a long screech that was emitted from the island. It was loud and unrestrained, but it gave people a hair-raising sense of danger. Before long, Klein heard the galloping sounds of horses as he saw 2 steeds that seemed to be tempered from gold rush out of the floating island. Behind it was a beautiful chariot which was similarly made from gold. At this moment, Cat Clear's voice was amplified as she hurriedly had it resound in every corner of the future. Look down, don't look at it. Klein was never one to put on a brave front. He subconsciously lowered his head upon hearing those words and looked at his leather boots. He noticed that the sunlight which illuminated the deck was becoming brighter before it dimmed and was rapidly restored to its former brilliance. It's all right now. Cat Clear's voice sounded in the ship again without any obvious emotional fluctuations. Only then did Klein look up. He discovered that the 2 steeds tempered from gold and the beautiful chariot they pulled behind it had vanished. The diamond pillar silently supported the floating island as resplendent glows swirled around it. What a huge diamond, what a strange floating island. What would happen if I hadn't lowered my head and had watched the golden chariot charge forward? Klein looked around as he suddenly frowned. A pirate who stood about 7 to 8 meters away from him had already vanished. Standing there were 2 pitch-black footprints. Looking at the ashes floating in midair, Klein vaguely knew the outcome of not lowering his head. Thankfully, Admiral of Stars has been here a few times in the past. She knows what to avoid and when to bow her head. If I had hired Mr. Hanged Man, even if he was the one steering the ghost ship, we might have already been wiped out by now. No. If the future hadn't arrived at its destination ahead of time without giving me any time to prepare, I would have long sought out Will Orsetton's advice. A magician never performs unprepared. Besides, if I had hired Mr. Hanged Man, I definitely would have purchased the relevant information from Mam Hermit Klein first sight before recovering his calm. He didn't suggest visiting the floating island to explore it. He left the future to pass it by and head forward. In the rest of the time, the sea was like the outer world. There were only the undulating waves, the vastness, silence, and endlessness. Klein occasionally saw fire embers floating on the surface of the sea, but he didn't find any signs of marine creatures, including mermaids. Time ticked by, and lunch was soon underway. Just as Klein was about to leave the deck for the dining hall, he suddenly realized that his surroundings had darkened. The sky, which had remained in a midday state, no longer had any sunlight as it was covered in rich darkness. This change was so sudden and fast that Klein's first reaction was to wonder who had switched off the lights. Silently, the future was covered in a layer of resplendent stars that illuminated paths in every direction. Catlia's voice that contained a magnetic allure was once again magnified as it resounded in everyone's ears. Return to your room or find any corner you can and make yourself fall asleep. Then, wait until you wake up naturally. Puzzled, Frankly asked loudly, what will happen if I don't sleep? At that moment, his voice boomed like a speaking bear. Catlia stood behind the window of the captain's cabin and said, when we wake up, we will find you gone, never to be found again. The night here is terrifying. Klein was curious, but he had no thoughts of attempting to stay awake. He returned to his room, and using the starlight which hadn't been extinguished on the future, he unfolded a paper crane and picked up a pencil to quickly write. What should be taken note of when traveling to the dangerous waters on the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea? Where can I find mermaids there? Putting down the pencil, he folded the crane. Without taking off his coat, he lay in bed and, with the help of cogitation, quickly fell asleep. In a hazy world, he suddenly jolted awake, clearly knowing that he was dreaming. No one is infiltrating it. Klein surveyed his surroundings and found himself on a mountain top. Behind him and to his sides were black, cloister-like buildings. Ahead of him was a withered tree and a protruding boulder. On top of the boulder, Catlia sat alone. She hugged her knees and leaned her body forward as she stared at the mountain opposite them. She was still dressed in the black classical robe that exuded an air of mystery. Her expression wore an indescribable look of confusion. At that moment, she didn't move at all. It was as though she was a stone sculpture. Why is she in my dream? Klein took a few steps forward and leaped onto a boulder. Before he could ask, he was stunned by the vast scene before his eyes. It was a feeling that struck a blow to his body and soul. In front of the boulder was a bottomless cliff, and across the cliff was a mountain which was covered with countless palaces, spires, and majestic city walls. These buildings were opulent and stacked in circles. Just one of them was abnormally huge and didn't resemble a human's residence. Combined together, it had an indescribable sense of epic proportions that seemed legendary or mythical. The sun hung far away as it cast the colors of the sunset onto the city as the light seemed to be frozen. This is a dream shared by all of us. Catlia continued sitting there, hugging her legs as she said as though she was in a reverie. A dream shared by everyone. Klein repeated Catlia's words inwardly as he slowly realized the situation he was in. Nighttime in these dangerous waters would connect the dreams of all living creatures. And any creature that didn't sleep would lack the necessary protection, as their soul bodies weren't in the dream. As such, they would suffer an unknown attack. As for why such an attack would lead to one's disappearance and not instant death, Klein, who hadn't actually experienced it, had no grounds for speculation. As his thoughts raced, Klein retracted his gaze from Catlia's body, recasting them onto the magnificent city on the opposite cliff. He thought out of curiosity. If this world can really be formed from the connection of dreams from all the local creatures, who could have imagined such an unimaginable city? He observed for a few seconds before asking, what is its name? What's the name of this city that could only exist in myths and legends? Catlia stared ahead in a daze as she spoke as though she was in a reverie. No idea, there will be a chance of seeing it every time we enter the dream, but it's impossible to approach. She said that it resembles the Great Twilight Hall in Fisak. She likely has her own guesses, but she has never told me. She, that Queen Mystic, the Great Twilight Hall is where the Church of the God of Combat's papal chair is. Klein surveyed the area and deliberated before saying, I plan to look around. He believed that the future wouldn't leave these waters anytime soon. He would definitely encounter more nights and enter this dream world several times. Therefore, to defend against any accidents and to obtain intel, it was necessary for him to explore the area. And the exploration no doubt needed a partner. Catlia remained sitting there, hugging her knees. Her tone remained ethereal as she said, not interested. This isn't what a mature pirate admiral should say. You could have been more euphemistic. Mam Hermit, you resemble a young petulant lady. Klein was taken aback as he suspected if he had misled. This was in conflict with the Admiral of Stars he had in his mind. Thinking of how Gem and Sparrow also had his side of not being afraid of dirt and hardship, he came to a realization. He quickly made a guess. Catlia isn't completely awake in the dream. She is able to know that she's in a dream, but she's unable to effectively control it. That is to say that she would unknowingly depict the feelings buried deep in her heart or reveal some of her personality which she usually suppresses. It's no wonder she said that she was never able to approach that miraculous city. It's because she never had the intention of exploring it herself. Klein thought for a moment and deliberately probed. We might be able to discover something over there. Not going, Catlia didn't hesitate to reply, but she never shook her head. I'll be here waiting. She really is in a semi-unconscious state. Klein made the judgment based on her reaction and tone. He didn't waste any more time and turned to leap off the boulder. Klein's feet stepped on the ground as he subconsciously looked back. Catlia remained sitting there hugging her knees. There wasn't anyone around, and the congealed sunset from the city opposite her shone over, producing a long shadow for her, blending with one of the shadows produced by withered trees. A gentle mountain breeze blew as the black figure gently shook. Catlia didn't move as she stubbornly waited on the spot. At such times, there's a need for a psychiatrist to interpret the dream's emotions. This has nothing to do with the revelations obtained from divination. Klein curled his lips and surveyed his surroundings to seek a direction in which to explore. He discovered that regardless of the direction he took, he would end up at the black buildings formed from the cloisters. There was a towering wall that isolated it from the cliff. No matter how the exploration was made, one had to pass by the cloister unless one jumped down the cliff. Since there was no other choice, Klein went directly to the pitch-black door of the cloister. The door was nearly 10 meters tall, and it didn't look like it was prepared for human use. Klein sized it up for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and extended his hands to push at the ends of the door. A creaking sound followed. The door's weight far exceeded Klein's imagination. His muscles bulged as his face flushed red. Yet, he was only able to move the door by a tiny bit without being able to push it open. Thankfully, it's only a dream. As long as there's reason to believe, I can raise my strength without truly activating creeping hunger. Klein exhaled and made his left glove be tainted with a paleness. In the midst of dark green sparkles, he obtained the strength of a zombie. His arm turned thicker as his legs swelled. Screech! A deep grinding sound boomed as the door slowly opened to reveal its interior. The two dark spires and the black buildings were connected by covered bridges as they surrounded a vast greyish-oak square. There were plenty of holes in the square. Embedded in them were huge arrows. There were flaming stacks in various spots as if they had previously encountered an attack. Klein passed through the cave's entrance and entered the square. Unsurprisingly, he saw Frank Lee, Nina, Otter Love, and company there. This is their dream. It doesn't seem so, or should it be said that everyone's dream is limited to themselves? They will then be randomly placed somewhere in this world? Klein guessed without confidence. Frank Lee was the closest to him. He was holding a shovel and digging at some rubble. Beside him were the white bread, toast, and roasted fish which had previously fallen to the floor. He plans on using them as fertilizer. He's planting things even in his dreams. Klein went over and casually asked, "What are you doing?" Frank didn't stop, but he revealed a smile. "I'm cultivating some little things. They need to sleep in the soil for some time before they can grow big and proliferate." "What's their use?" Klein asked, both worried and curious. Frank beamed and said, "They're a crossbreed of fungus. It can make bulls produce milk. This way, we can obtain more milk, allowing more people to drink good milk." "Spare those bulls." Klein's face twitched as he asked, "Will it succeed?" "There's no problems with the effects, but I'm very worried that they can't reproduce," Frank said with a frown. "May death forever favor them." Klein prayed as he walked past Frank Lee and headed for the black building's entrance across the square. Along the way, he passed by Nina and Navigator Otter Love, who were drinking beside a collapsed pillar. "Have you ever thought of leaving the pirate crew after you're older to find a man to marry and settle down?" "I don't think anyone wishes to drift out at sea their entire lives." Otter Love took off his pointed bonnet and revealed his slightly hoary hair. His eyes and tone informed Klein that in between the lines, he meant, "If you wish so, why not consider me? Mr. Navigator, you are old enough to be Nina's father. You need to consider your health passing by." Klein couldn't help but lampoon when he heard the conversation. Nina gulped a mouthful of beer and looked in a particular direction. "No, that's not the life I wish to lead. Before joining you, I once attempted to settle down in the east coast of Fisak and not be a pirate again, but I was unable to bear with the boredom. I have to lug wood and move things every day, and I can only stay at home at night. I'm not allowed to go to the bar or go out hunting in the wilderness. Such a life seems constant and unchanging. Furthermore, I suffered all kinds of criticism, tolerating those irritating people. I have to worry about the cops even if I wished to beat them up. It's still better on the ship. Although it's boring most of the time, we can often go to different places and encounter different matters. Hey, even the most boring times can wreck those fellows, training them into passable pirates. I can also tell them that the one who performs the best every month can spend the night in my room. Then, I watch them excitedly enjoy the torment. Of course, spending the night and having sex are different. It depends on my mood. A true female pirate, everyone wishes for something different." Klein neutrally gave a comment and didn't believe that there was anything wrong with Nina's ideas. "I won't disagree with her choice, but if she often kills, engages in arson, and plunders, I don't mind using her head to exchange for a bounty the next time we meet." Klein retracted his gaze and arrived at the suspected entrance of the black buildings and spires. Subconsciously, he turned his head and realized that the shadows in the corner seemed normal, but there was something different about it. Bloodless Heath Doyle, he hides in the shadows even in a dream. According to my limited knowledge of psychology, this is a result of greatly lacking a sense of security. Klein pushed another door which was similarly almost 10 meters tall. Amidst the grinding sounds, his gaze suddenly froze. Behind the door was a vast hall which had 2 rows of stone pillars supporting it. The hall was abnormally dark without any candlelight. As the main door opened, the light from outside shone in, lighting up the interior to make it clear. Klein saw that there were murals of various colors, with gold being the main color of choice on the dome. They were connected to one another without any gaps. It gave him a magnificent and sacred feeling. Thump, thump, thump. A figure had its back facing Klein, using the axe in its hand to chop it along a huge tree. Its motives were unknown. The figure was dressed in a white shirt and a black vest. It didn't look like any of the pirates on the ship. There's someone else in these waters? Or could it be the mysterious pair of eyes that had been observing the deck and me? Klein's heart sank as he slowed down. He warily approached and came to the figure's side where he discerned the figure. It was a man who looked young. He had blonde short hair that was split 70-30. His emerald green eyes looked focused and serious. "What are you doing? What is this place?" Klein carefully asked. He intuitively believed that the person wasn't the owner of the mysterious eyes. The young man raised his hand to touch his earlobes without turning his head. "Why are you asking these questions? My ship has sunk, and I'm busy making a canoe for myself. I don't have time to speak to you." Klein thought before asking, "Who are you?" "Who am I? I'm the unlucky Anderson. Ever since I saw that mural, I've been plagued with bad luck." The young man pointed in a direction. Tracing his finger, Klein saw a mural. The mural depicted a sea of fire that split in the middle to produce a path. On the path, there was a long line of people. The members either held their heads low with pious devotion or prostrated to the ground. Their destination was in the depths of the sea. Their leader was a lanky man with long silver hair. His facial features were mild, and his eyes were tightly closed. On his back were layered wings. This Klein's pupils constricted suddenly. He recognized the leader on the mural. It was the angel of fate which Little Sun had once depicted. It was the tailed Devra, Ouroboros. After recognizing the leader on the mural, Klein subconsciously suspected that it was something from his dream. However, he quickly rejected the idea. This was because the unlucky Anderson wasn't someone he knew. He was also not someone that had left an impression on him. There was a low chance of him being the extension of his own dream. And Anderson had clearly said that he became unlucky after seeing the mural. It was strongly tied to the mural, so it could only be the case that the mural was part of Anderson's dream. As he focused and looked carefully, Klein quickly realized that the mural was somewhat different from the mural that Little Sun saw in the true creator's abandoned temple. The background here was a sea burning with golden flames, while the previous one was that of a desolate plain. The destination here was the depths of the sea, while the previous one was the destination of a distant mountain. On the mountain top was a huge cross and figure hanging upside down. The bottom of the angel of fate Ouroboros' feet was black slush with heads pointing down and fishes stuck inside. Previously, it was a meandering river. It's a different mural, but more of a memory from different stages of the same pilgrimage. Klein nodded with a guess. A similar scene surfaced in his mind. A very long time ago, in a particular period of the fourth epoch, Ouroboros led a devout group of pilgrims, or the remnant believers of the true creator. With many powerful enemies in pursuit, they rowed a boat through this sea. Due to certain reasons, he abandoned the boat. With the help of the true creator or his own powers, he parted the sea and led the devotees through it and into the forsaken land of the gods, leaving behind the kindling for organizations such as the Rose Redemption and Aurora Order. In the forsaken land of the gods, they tore through desolate plains, and on the pilgrimage, they built temples along the way. And one of them was discovered by Little Sun and Company. With Howell or Septon was forced to restart a cycle and be reborn as a baby. The tailed devil is likely still alive. Does this mean that he eventually arrived at the destination with the pilgrims, the holy residence of the true creator? Does this mean that the holy residence of the true creator is somewhere in the forsaken land of the gods? With this in mind, Klein suddenly felt a baffling sense of wistfulness. If my theory is correct, then that means that no matter how the City of Silver tries to save itself, or how they continue passing the flame, once the true creator completely awakens or is restored to his original state, they would unavoidably head towards destruction. When you are very close to the divine kingdom or holy residence of an evil god, your survival has nothing to do with your struggles. This is like the bubbles produced when sea waves surged to the shore. Once the waves recede, they would vanish. Human civilization and ethnic groups are just that weak under the gaze of an evil god. No, I can't be that pessimistic. I was only making a guess. Perhaps the one that forced Will or Septon to reincarnate isn't our Ouroboros. Perhaps the true creator wouldn't recover or awaken that easily. He might be sealed by the 7 deities. Therefore, the City of Silver still has a chance. A path between the forsaken land of the gods and the external world needs to be forged before the evil god escapes from his shackles, allowing them to be moved out. This is probably why the chief of the City of Silver released Elder Shepherd. They need to use all the power they can get. Klein forcibly retracted his thoughts. He suddenly felt somewhat worried, afraid that his arrival was enough for him to be stuck in an endless cycle of fate created by the tailed Devra. At this point, he instinctively wished to take 4 steps counterclockwise and go above the grey fog. He wanted to forcibly search for memories that he might have lost, but ultimately, he resisted those actions and prepared to observe first. From his interpretation of the symbols, there were no repeating rivers. There was only a black slush with fish embedded inside. It didn't mean the existence of a circle of fate, only the lingering of bad luck. This was identical to what Anderson said. As a king of angels, our Ouroboros definitely has more than a cycle of fate. Different temples have different murals, and them using different powers is completely logical. Besides, this is a dream. Besides, even if I didn't do anything and really am stuck in a repeated cycle, making me repeatedly converse with the Admiral of Stars, to the point of making my observations, the problem will be resolved once Monday comes. The Tarot Club will definitely not be held. Miss Justice and the others will definitely feel puzzled as they make a prayer, and I'll use it to regain my memories. Klein instantly felt confident as the chaos and tension in his heart was buried instead of disappearing. He looked up ahead and discovered that the hall went further in. There was no end to it, and there was light shining inside. However, it was restricted to the entrance. The other areas were dark and only became darker the deeper it was. All that could be seen were the wooden doors on both sides. Their destinations were unknown. Upon seeing this dark and creepy scene, Klein's desire to continue exploring was minimized. To encounter a mural left behind by a king of angels here, who knows what will happen if I delve deeper or enter some room. The fear of the unknown was an extremely ancient feeling. A premonition of danger with unknown origins had brought about a strong terror towards the unknown. Klein observed himself for a few seconds before he stopped proceeding forward. He turned towards Anderson, who was chopping the gigantic tree. "Why are you here?" Anderson looked up and scoffed. "I'm a treasure hunter, so tell me, why would I be here?" "Treasure hunter?" Klein casually asked. "There's treasure here?" Anderson continued busying himself with the creation of the so-called canoe. His voice suddenly turned deep. "There are treasures everywhere in these waters, as long as you obtain it successfully and leave alive." "That's true, but the problem is that it's very dangerous if one isn't a demigod, but it's even more dangerous for a demigod to be here." Klein looked into the hall's depths and asked, "Do you know where this place is?" Anderson traced his gaze and said, "I don't know. At least a third of my companions formed a team and headed in to explore, but they never returned." "Are you referring to the real world or the dream world?" Klein asked with a clear line of thought. Bang! After the axe landed, Anderson laughed. "Of course it's in the real world. The ones that proceeded to explore the dream are the other third of my companions. They similarly didn't return." Klein inhaled as he thought. "Where are their bodies in the real world?" "They have mutated into monsters. They killed off quite a number of my companions." Anderson raised his axe and cleaved down. Clang! Amidst a crisp sound, his axe broke into 2. As the crack was towards the back, the fragment immediately shot at him. Anderson's right chest and abdomen immediately bled like a spewing fountain. He held his left hand to his wound and looked up at Klein. Smiling bitterly, he said, "I told you I was plagued with bad luck ever since I saw that mural. Thankfully, this isn't considered too unlucky. At the very least, they didn't destroy my ordinarily handsome face. Are such descriptive terms supposed to be used that way?" Klein looked at Anderson quickly pull out the fragments from his body as he handled the wound and consumed some medicine. He discovered that Anderson was unfazed, and the skill involved in his actions meant that he had already gotten accustomed to it. Klein had a single hand in his pocket as he played with the coins in it. After some deliberation, he asked, "When your companions began the exploration, were you part of the group that stayed behind to study the mural?" Anderson was taken aback as he inserted his medicine bag into his belt and wiped his mouth. "No, I was part of the group that did the exploration." As he spoke, he grinned and revealed a genial smile. This Klein's pupils constricted as he bent his back slightly and raised his left palm. At this moment, blinding sunlight illuminated everything in a dazzling white. Then, it dimmed and vanished. Klein naturally opened his eyes and discovered that the outside had been restored to the midday state. He took out the pocket watch in his inner pocket and opened it. Only half an hour passed. This night is rather short. That unlucky Anderson looked very normal, but who knew that he was that terrifying? Rolling to his feet, Klein suddenly recalled something. Snake of Fate Will or Septon had yet to reply to him. As everyone's dream had been pulled into the world without the connection of the spirit world, he was unable to locate me. Or did he sense our Ouroboros' aura and didn't dare come close? Or could there be something problematic with these waters to begin with? As his thoughts whirled, Klein decided to verify it. As for how it could be verified, the method was simple. He could sleep again while it was still noon. However, he wasn't in a rush to do so. This was because he wasn't sure if there were any taboos about sleeping in the day. Wearing his cap, Klein came outside the captain's cabin and knocked on the door. After 3 knocks, he retracted his hand and patiently waited. Before long, Katlia opened the door. She no longer looked as lost as she was in the dream. She had worn her heavy glasses once again. "Is sleeping in the day all right?" Klein asked directly. Katlia nodded, "Yes." After answering, she hesitated and asked, "It seems you were very proactive in that dream." Realizing how much danger lurked in these waters, and thinking about how he would be forced to show some of his abilities, Klein decided to proactively lay the foundations of his future explanations. He looked at Katlia and smiled politely. Yes, this is a gift bestowed upon me by my lord. My lord, under Katlia's thick glasses, her eyes clearly shimmered. In a rare instance, she frowned slightly and eased them without asking any more questions. Klein thought for a moment, then he added, be careful of Heath Doyle. Katlia clearly understood what he meant and directly answered, don't worry. He has a sealed artifact, which has a negative effect of him only being able to hear voices from nearby. That's a smart use of a negative effect. Klein didn't drone on as he took off his hat and bowed before returning to his room. He lay down once again and used cogitation to fall asleep. In the dream world, he woke up and saw the familiar pitch-black plains and black steeple. Phew, it's still possible to connect. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and travelled into the steeple. In the usual place, he saw the scattered tarot cards and the new words. There's plenty of dangers there, the most dangerous being the dream that happens when night falls. It isn't about the disappearances if you do not sleep, but there's one thing to remember. Do not explore that dream. Absolutely do not explore that dream. Since there's not enough space, I won't explain why. All right, it's just a joke. The reason is that the area contains some of the dreams left behind by a deity.